Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Catholic ReCon Testimonies from Reverts and Converts. I'm your host, Eddie Trask. Don't forget to subscribe and share these videos and comment on these videos. And if you have a story, please reach out to me, info@eddietrask.com, and I'd love to have you on the show. This week's guest is Taylor Moore. Taylor Moore is in RCIA currently. There was one other guest that I can remember, maybe two other guests that I remember that were interviewed in the process of RCIA. And what I find amazing about that, in fact, I think I can think of one person that said that they didn't want to share their testimony because they had not gone through RCIA. But what I encourage people to do, and this is what I appreciate about Taylor, is to share the journey even before being received into the Catholic Church. And I think it's very special and it can really help a lot of people that are also on the journey. Taylor, thank you, first of all. Thanks for being on
Yeah,
the
no,
show.
thanks for having me. It's amazing the way that we met, and it's awesome to be here, and I'm happy to be able to share and hopefully help people along their journey, or just get the message out.
Why don't we start there? How did we meet? Why don't you tell the
Yeah,
people?
yeah. So I uh, very recently was searching for a book for my brother, nonetheless, in a local religious store here in Boise, Idaho, and I was searching for Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. And I just was browsing through some other books and I came across a book that I was like, oh, this is interesting. And it was titled Confession All. And I started kind of reading the back cover and reading some things that were going on in there. And I was like, wow, this is very similar to what I kind of experienced, although we experienced it. And it's written by you, of course, for the people that don't know, it's written by Eddie. Not a shameless plug at all, I looked you up a little bit and I was like, wow, he lives in Meridian and we have this very similar story. So I ended up reaching out and uh yeah, ended up and then that's kind of where we are here now. And we met for coffee, of course, and yeah, it's been kind of interesting to kind of hear somebody in your book and like that went through very similar challenging experiences with pride and all kinds of stuff like that, right? And yeah, I just saw like a similarity between those types of journeys, and it was really kind of comforting to hear that somebody else had gone through some of those things too.
Well, and it was truly comforting for me too to hear that, just to find people that have parallel journeys, even if it's in certain parts. I just obviously it means a lot, and then the minute we met, it's like immediate friendship because of
Yeah.
those similarities. So, as it relates to ending up now in RCIA, how did this start? Why don't you talk about, if you want to, talk about
No.
go back as far as you think is relevant and
Yeah.
bring
Yeah.
everyone up to speed.
So yeah, I think to kind of highlight maybe how my challenge of coming to the Catholic faith, how many kind of things were stacked against me as God bless my family and things like that. But my early childhood influences uh, did not speak well about Christianity, and in fact, influenced a evil perspective on the Catholic faith in specific. So I went through a lot of my years growing up and um, never looking at Christianity as an option of anything that was valid. It just was a belief structure that was in me, very deeply rooted. Um, and so I went through a lot of my life with the world telling me who I was, right? Like, oh, you need to, chase the money, the picket fence house, all that stuff, and so I did, and I finally got everything Like I had a really good job. I had, you know, all the toys I could ever imagine. I was engaged with doing, you know, every activity that I could have possibly dreamt of doing, and still was unfulfilled. And so this is where now it's kind of awesome. Looking back on that, I ended up kind of just walking away from everything in my life. I had a very sweet woman in my life of an 11-year relationship, and I just was experiencing such a movement. I was fishing is where it started. So and I just had this interesting experience that I couldn't reproduce. And that experience, it was an internal experience, and it had me feeling very joyful. And I was weeping tears of joy fishing, and it happened for like, I don't know, it felt like 40 minutes. I didn't look at a clock or anything like that, but and I didn't want it to stop. And it's not like I knew that that was from God at that point in time. I was just like, wow, that was the weirdest experience I've ever had in my life. But because of my beliefs, right, that it couldn't be that Jesus Christ, bless his holy name forever, but it couldn't have been that, right? And like, so but I started questioning everything. I started questioning, well, what was that like? And that kind of led me down a spiritual road that was not Christianity, which is fine because I learned a lot on that road. Learned a lot, and God used a lot of. Now on the tail end of it, I can see how God is really using so much that I learned on that journey for good, and then also taking all the stuff that I learned that wasn't good away. But it led me kind of down this spiritual path to finding Christ, really, and that included ending that relationship that I'd mentioned and quitting my job. And I had enough savings that, you know, I went on a journey to go find the truth. And I bought a van, and I said, I'm going to go live in the van and see if that's the freedom that I'm looking for, see if that's satisfied. I was still looking to the physical world to satisfy my desires. I had no really like understanding of spirituality at all. I naturally felt pretty inclined to Buddhism. Just when I was in the military, on Sundays, I wasn't going to go to a Christian worship deal in basic military training. So I started going to Buddhism. This is in the past. Mm-hmm. So I said, you know what, I'll give that a try. And, you know, because on Sundays you get to go to a religious worship for 2 hours a day on Sunday, and you get away from the dorms and all that stuff. So I said, you know what, I'll go back to that and really explore that. Because once again, it couldn't be Christianity, right? Like, and yeah, I landed in that pretty hard. And I'm the type of person that, because I was on this truth-seeking journey, that I was pushing these spiritual practices to their limit and really seeing what they contain. And I found a lot of you know, the weaknesses reveal themselves when you do that in a faith. And so that was my experience, is that like, even though I might not have known what I was doing, I still feel like that God was seeing that I was wanting to find the truth, and that things were kind of stacked against me or whatever.
Hey, if we could pause right there. Can you explain when you're saying you're pushing I guess, a belief system to the limit, and then you're finding that it's not it? How would you do that? I'm trying to make sense of that.
Yeah. So Buddhism specifically, I blended it with some of these New Age concepts as well, which is not, New Age is not good. It's really a like, God bless anybody that's in that, but I really recommend anybody that's in that to get out of that, because it's not a good thing at all. Buddhism's better than that. But yeah, so pushing it to its limits would be really diving in deep on, you understand that you just start with like a rule. Okay. It's like, okay, obviously peace, like defining peace was super important to me on my journey. And peace to me means that all things could be going catastrophically around you, but you can be fine. Uh, Internally, you're fine, even if just the world is, just crumbling around you. And so exposing yourself to sufferings in life is really necessary to really push these faiths to the limit and really use the spiritual practices and the doctrines that they offer to say, in these challenging times, does this spiritual practice offer you the peace no matter what's going on in the physical world around you? Are you immune? It's almost like, is it inoculating you? Is this vaccine going to help you to remain peaceful during a really significant trial? And I was given a very significant trial, and that really quickly revealed that Buddhism, New Age, any legalistic structure is not capable of resurrecting you from a dark place, and that's where I met Jesus Christ. So, yeah.
No, that was helpful. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these things thanks for the question, because these things like make sense to me, I guess. It's like, yeah, but to continue on with that, I ended up, like I said, getting into this trial period. I was practicing Buddhism, and it started kind of bleeding into New Age, and that's pretty common in the Buddhist kind of realm, at least outside of like Thailand and in the East where they really practice it. But it kind of just, out here in the West, it kind of just comes with the territory of this New Age spirituality. And anyway, I ended up meeting a woman while I was engaged in this, and things were great. It's like, oh, cool. Like, here is kind of like the fruits of, I'm using Christian terms now, but at the time I was just, I wasn't using those terms, but here's kind of the fruits of being spiritual, and like you get to connect with people, and like, cool, we have these same beliefs, and it felt really great. And bless her, we have a great relationship, but the things started to come apart in that relationship, and we also had a unexpected pregnancy as well. And so but I was already recognizing that this relationship wasn't going to work very well, and we tried for a good bit of time to figure things out, and it just wasn't. It was very, very obvious that this was not a place where I felt like that I could be the best father to my son. And so I made a really tough decision to leave and to heal before my son was birthed, so that I could actually be a good father. Well, at this point in time, I'm still practicing New Age and Buddhism, and I went into a deep state of despair. Very, very dark place in them. And didn't know how I was going to be a good parent. Was all alone. Didn't have a whole lot of friends. And really was just kind of getting torched in this deal. And it was quite painful. And I remember having a supervisor in the military that gave me a Bible. And I said, you know what, maybe I'll go to my storage unit, grab that Bible, and like give it a read. Just give it a read. I wasn't actually getting much out of it. I think I was in just such a state of despair. It's so hard for me to get in. And I tried praying, and it just, but I remember I said, I'm going to try going to church. I'm going to just try going to church. And I said, I landed in church a handful of times in my life, like very handful. It was probably less than 3 times in my life that I ever stepped foot in a church prior to all of this. And I said, I had this dog back in the day. I know I'm kind of going back and forth. I'm sorry. But I had this dog way back in the day, and he died. And I loved him a lot. And he was a puppy when he died. He was like, it was just a young puppy. He was 2 years old. I really loved that dog. He died on Christmas Eve. And that on that year, that was on a Friday. And I remember the next day just feeling like I don't know why, I just wanted to go to a church. And I knew nothing about Christianity. And I found that there was a church open on Saturdays. And it was the Seventh Day Adventist church. So I went to the Adventist church. The preacher that was there said something that I'll never forget about Jesus. He just said, Jesus is he was fully man, and he put his pants on the same way that we do. Like, and I don't know, it seemed like looking back on it, but it connected me to Jesus a little bit. That was like the first time that I had this little tiny, I was like, oh, okay, cool. That was, a year and a half prior to all this happening. So naturally, when I'm seeking out a church, I was like, oh, I'll go to an Adventist church. I liked what that guy said. I'll go to an Adventist church. So I ended up going, and they had a Bible study, and I saw it on their website, and I said they do a Bible study for an hour prior to their Saturday service. So I said, well, I'm having a hard time reading the Bible. Maybe I'll go and ask some questions and see what it offers. They were in the book of 1 Samuel. And I can't remember what chapter it is in. But I found myself in the Bible at wherever they were reading. I saw like a part of my life in it. And I felt this really amazing connection happen. It was very similar to what I experienced on that lake fishing, but it wasn't as strong. It was just kind of like it was almost like I was receiving like a message that was like, see, my written word knows about your situation. It knows about you. It knows about your situation. And so I kept going to church, even though I was in despair. And I kept going and kept going and kept finding myself in this 1 Samuel area. I kept finding things that I'd experienced in life and kept finding, wow, there's so much wisdom in this book. And coming from a belief Buddhism that's saying, oh, we have all this wisdom, I really started to realize that I was in connection with the one who created wisdom, who created all wisdom. And then I started reading other books like Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, the wisdom collection. And at this time, I was reading a New King James Version Bible, so I didn't even have Wisdom and Wisdom of Sirach, which are amazing books, by the way. And so when that happened, the book of Proverbs really helped me to unplug from Buddhism, got all their wisdom from God. And that really started challenge my beliefs in this really beautiful way. And then I started to cleanse myself. Not because I was receiving a consolation, and not because I was had some moral thing to do. I just knew that the Holy Spirit can't dwell in the unclean. I just had this knowingness about it. And so I just started to really focus in on my addictions and I had a nicotine addiction. I was being promiscuous with a woman as well. And I knew that those things had to stop. I just knew that was time to take this a little more seriously, and that I had a small sliver of taste of life, and within my soul, that this was the first time that I was actually feeling something that Buddhism never offered me, something that New Age never offered me, something that I was beginning to get little tiny slivers of life. And it took about 4 to 6 months of being in despair, but I saw some light. I felt it, and so I started to clean my act up. And then this is when things started getting really, really interesting, is when I started taking it seriously and starting to just be very obedient to God, being just like very Old Testament obedient. And I'll give you a note too. Like at this time, I still was in disbelief about Jesus Christ. I was reading the Old Testament only. I wasn't even opening the New Testament. I was like, I love the Old Testament. I love the obedience. I love the legalism here. I was still kind of legalistic in my approach to things. And I was like, I still don't know about this, Jesus Christ fellow. In my mind, he was still kind of this like mystical character that wasn't even like real.
What year, before you go on? What year is this?
This is happening in 2023. This is happening in June of 20.
Shoot. What?
Well, spring to June. June is when I ended up finding the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Uh, when I
Okay. I'm
ended up.
sorry for breaking you there, but
No, it's good.
that's awesome. Okay, so last spring, you're
Yeah,
going through all this.
going through all this.
So you're in the Old Testament. You like the idea, or you like the legalistic stuff that you're seeing, rituals,
Yeah,
Mosaic law.
yeah.
Go on. Sorry.
And I'm actually, ignorantly enough, I'm doing it. Like I stop eating pork. Like that's how silly it was. I was like, oh, I'll follow these laws. Like I read Deuteronomy, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll stop eating pork. Like this is great. So, and I was kind of just being very private about it. I don't know why. I think that it was just some pride, right? Like looking back on it, I think that there was like a lot of pride and maybe some shame tied there of maybe not being so open to be able to admit that I was wrong about my other spiritual practices or whatever. Like having this 180 turn, it just felt like my whole world was getting turned over. And so I think I was still kind of like latching on to, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it my way in a way. And so I kind of like stayed in the Old Testament and was just
Well,
kind of,
and it's interesting did you end up at a synagogue, or did you even
no,
think of Judaism as that's so fascinating.
no. The funny thing is on this journey, I have had this Muslim friend, bless him. He's been an amazing friend for a lot of years, actually. And I'm actually starting to get really drawn into Islam at this time. Like I'm like, wow, this, because I'm practicing this obedience. I'm really finding that this is helping me feel better because I mean, just cleaning up your life in that way.
Yeah, having restrictions. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it just feels better. You feel cleaner. You feel, and that's one thing that I've learned on this journey too, is like, for anybody that's listening, I'll stop here and kind of share this. Anybody that's listening, a lot of people say, well, why does God make us like do all these things? Why does God have all these rules? It's not that he has these rules, he has these things that he's trying to protect you from. Like, all these things in this world that, like, oh, you freely, be promiscuous over here, do this over here. Those things aren't really healthy for us. And that's what I was finding out, is like, wow, I feel better not doing those things than when I was actively participating pretty frequently. Yeah. So anyway, this friend of mine, he's kind of talking to me about Islam, but he's teaching me a lot about the virtues of God in that Old Testament way, right? In this very Old Testament way, we're actually having conversations that are actually pretty good. And I would still say to this day, yeah, the more that I learn about God, I'm like, wow, he actually had a pretty good understanding of God. I hope that many Muslims find the peace and love of Jesus Christ, though, because it's the fullness of God in its totality. But and so in any case, this is happening, and then my son's starting to get born, and I wasn't. He was born in June, and I was still an unbaptized Protestant, like Seventh Day Adventist participator or whatever. I don't even know, just a person at the church. And I still hadn't really a deep belief in Jesus Christ at this time. I was kind of starting to entertain the idea. I was like, I wonder why this figure in history is so prominent. And I remember my son being born, and I remember, okay, it's time to really like be a good moral character. And I was starting to read the New Testament at this time. But the first time that I felt an encounter with Jesus Christ, like an encounter with God, was Luke chapter 7, verse 34 through 50, the sinful woman forgiven. Reading that, I actually had it read to me by the priest. He said, "You remind me of this," and I felt like I wanted to read this to you. And when he read it to me, I was like, "Wow, this is something else." And I read it over the next week, and it moved me deeply. I felt loved, and I felt very forgiven by just reading. I could just read it, and I would just weep. And that went on for about 3 days, where I just was feeling the forgiveness of God. I'd cleaned up my act a lot and was, living a better life. And yeah, that was amazing to feel the love of God come into my heart and just penetrate some areas that I had no idea weren't alive.
The you said, I thought you said priest, and I missed the jump from participating the Protestant church. And
Yeah.
did you say priest?
No, I didn't mean to say priest. If I did,
Okay,
it
so
was
I apologize. Who was it that introduced that told you to read that Luke 7?
it was the pastor there.
Pastor. Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
If I did say priest, it's just because that's the word I'm used to
Yeah, yeah,
using.
yeah. I get it. I get it. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss some massive leap in the midst of that. So,
No, no, no. There's no massive leap there that we missed, but yeah, this is happen. That's happening, and things are going great between at this point in time too, around my son's birth. Things are actually going great between all glory to Jesus Christ, between me and my son's mother,
mm,
and this from this place of feeling this forgiveness and like feeling the love of God and feeling like I'm witnessing God resurrect me from this really deep level of despair. Uh, yeah, it was awesome because I felt like that. It felt almost though that there would be more support when I was around her. I had more patience and I had more understanding, and like I was just much more. And I didn't even have to try. In some ways, it kind of felt like that, even though I was still immature, and like we're all still growing, right? But that there was some extra support there because it was like just like an investment, right? It was almost I don't even know, I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like I would get like an extra like boost, just a boost of graces,
that's awesome. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
And so, but it would go away, and then I'd be like this, just this guy where it's like, oh, now it's back to like this relationship with Christ. And then he would kind of like, it felt like I was getting handed off to like the mother of my son and my son for a while. And then it would kind of like I was going between these two relationships for a while. And I wasn't really hanging out with a lot of friends, doing a lot of things, but so I was writing a lot of this stuff down. And this is where my truth coming into the truth of the Catholic faith starts. I had some pretty amazing stuff happen to me that was beginning to prove that this was real while I was still in the Adventist faith. Uh, I really, as I was cleaning myself up, it's not that I would hear God's voice, but I would have like this interpretation of a message happen. And it would usually come with a really heavy consolation, and it would be pretty wild to experience. And that happened quite a few times early on. And those were important as well, just to help like me move towards the light, help me to move. He helped me. He gave me everything I needed to move me towards the light. And so I'm writing down some of these miracles that I've experienced. I'm writing all this stuff down, and I'm thinking, wow, I have this like really amazing conversion story, right? Like I still have some like quite a bit of pride there and stuff. So I'm like, kind of self-exalting in this way. And so I'm thinking like, oh, I'm going to write this down. And at this time, I had this very like juvenile understanding of what actually is like amazing and like and something worthy of sharing or whatever. And so, but at this point in time, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna write a book. I'm gonna do this amazing stuff with this. And I get done writing in my journal one day. And I set it down and I'm all happy. I'm like, this is great. I'm gonna have everything from this writing. Like, oh, my life's gonna be fixed. Like, I'm gonna sell millions of books or whatever. Like, just total self exaltation. Just out the wazoo. And uh, I just get this really clear message that it comes in that form that I was talking about, where it's almost like an interpretation of the message, but it came with a consolation, but it came with a feeling of seriousness too, like almost like a rebuke in a way, but a very gentle one. It was almost like, it was just kind of like a stern, like it wasn't as like loving as I'd experienced before. It was just very much like a love, but hey, you need to listen to this kind of thing. And I got this message that says, hey, how you feel about that book, your journal, that you'll get everything from it, is how I want you to feel about my church, and my church is the Catholic Church. And when I heard that, it was not like I heard it, but when I interpreted that message, I knew nothing about Catholicism at this point. Nothing about it. But when I heard that, I sat down on my bed and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I had a couple Catholic friends at the time, but they weren't evangelizing me. They just were like, yeah, we're Catholic. And like, I'd hang out with them. And I had one friend that would kind of evangelize me, and a little bit. He would just kind of share his faith with me, but it was nothing that I was interested in. I was like, yeah, that's, that sounds like a cult and like all these things. But when I got that message, and I had been taught through my journey to trust that voice, and that it was proving to me through these small ways that I could trust it, that I could trust these messages, and that this was the voice that I was to follow. I sat down and I was like, well, I guess that's where I'm going to go. And so I went. I just instantly made the decision to go that day. It was I think it was on a Sunday too. I can't really remember. It might have been on a Monday. But we had a meetup at the Adventist church that I was in, and I just said, you know what? I'm just going to tell them that I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go be Catholic. I knew nothing about this stuff, and I just was trusting that really. And so I went and told them, and like they were supportive and whatever. So a couple of them tried to talk me out of it, and I just was like, no, I'm going to go do this. Like I trust this. In this. That message would only come through in really important times in my life during this conversion phase, and it never was wrong if I trusted it. It never was wrong. So I did. And because I committed to something that I didn't really know about, I just started researching, asking questions. And I love intellectual information, but I also love the affective, like my heart and like soul and stuff. I was very sensitive to that kind of thing. So I just found so much beauty in the Catholic faith. And I began to fall in love with Jesus more, because I started to see how the Catholic Church, even though, yeah, it's had its problems, but it reaches out it meets people where they're at in the way that Jesus Christ does, in this really like beautiful way, with all the like liturgical rites and like these different things to try to, these different expressions of these different levels of spirituality. And I found a home, because I also was able to look to the saints and find characteristics of myself in saints. And I also found a very natural spirituality in like the Carmelites. I was very much, because the Buddhist background, the Carmelites were very like, it was very attractive to me that within Christianity, you have these people that are also understanding that like, hey, we can have certain attachments that can lead to complications that get in the way of our relationship with Christ. And so I started to find that it's this place that accepts all, that there's so much all within the confines of Christianity, of course. But it's just this place that like accepted me. It accepts so many different expressions of Christianity, and and uh, and then like I started going down the history route of things and starting really researching the history. And when I started to realize that, and then the book of Job was so important in solidifying this, because it's like, well, how can I came up with those questions like, well, how can I justify some of the wrong things that the Catholic Church has done? And that's when the book of Job became so important to me, because there's like this component. And look, God can save many people. God can save people in all faiths. God's grace is not confined to that. But the book of Job for me coming into the Catholic faith was like, well, how do I reconcile with the problems of the church, and how do I, well, Job teaches us this loyalty, right? This like unbelievable loyalty to Christ. And if Christ established the church, I can be loyal to the thing that he established, to the church that he helped establish. And the problems that the church has, I can use Carmelite spirituality, the things that are very natural to me, to say, if those politics of the church are getting in the way of me and my relationship with Christ, I don't have to get consumed by it. Is it good for me to be aware of it? Yeah, sure. But I don't have to get consumed by it, because none of that gets in the way of me and Jesus. None of it. Not a single bit of it. But if I let it get in between me and Jesus, then yeah, it does. And it's like, I found this really beautiful exercise of my soul and heart there to really say, look, Satan's going to attack the Catholic Church. And I was going through a ton of spiritual warfare too, so I was getting to know Satan as well, the bugger. But like I just know that he's going to attack the truth. And that's when I started to see that, like, of course the truth is going to be assaulted by Satan. And like, just because the act of one person within the authority of the church, or a couple people within the authority of the church, or even if they group up, they're not, should they be, like representing the faith properly? Of course. Yeah. But if they don't, does that affect my salvation? No, it makes the church look bad, unfortunately. But like, and that was something that I really had to reconcile with a lot. Like, well, okay, but through Job, and through understanding that the herd that the shepherd is leading with the church is also going to be tried through the body of the church. Like, we're going to experience trials through the church. The church is going to give us trials that we need for our spiritual evolution, and this was really important for me. This was just so important in me finding that home, and really ridding out those beliefs of, like almost 30-year beliefs, 29-year beliefs of the Catholic Church is not the place of truth, And so it led me down the road where I had to be intellectually competent, as well as, surrendering my heart and fully surrendering myself to Christ. And that's been the best move that I've ever made in my life. I'm alive inside. I feel alive inside for the first time ever. And that's beautiful.
So you're researching the various objections that you have, trying to find answers. This is happening over the summer.
Yeah.
Were there any other objections that, like, was there one last thing that you felt you needed to make sense of before you entered RCIA, or were you already in RCIA trying to find these answers to the difficult questions?
Yeah. So my approach to it was just head first in the deep end. And I just figured that God was guiding me. I felt so guided by God in a lot of ways that I didn't really have to question everything. Once I like took in the book of Job, and like took in like seeing that individual sinners aren't responsible for the representation of the body of the church. After that, I was like, well, I'll learn as I go.
Sure.
And that's been a beautiful experience too. I just kind of was like, the church has 2,000 years of wisdom of thinking about how humans relate to God. And, I was just finding myself with, it was revealing itself as having so much wisdom in it that I really wasn't starting to question it anymore. I just was like, if I do have a question, it's probably just because I misunderstand what God's trying to protect me from, or that there's something outside of my wisdom and understanding that is important. And I just really kind of just dove into it, and now I find that the teachings on matrimony are super beautiful, like God's plan for marriage and God's plan for intimacy. Like these things, the sacramental lens of living life, it is so life-giving. It is unbelievable. And I haven't even received any sacraments. I'm not even baptized in the church. It's like I look to this sacramental lens of life and I'm like, this is beauty. This is absolute beauty and richness. And it takes depth to understand, and like depth to feel through it, and depth to kind of like it's so deep, and it exposes the wisdom of the church of having 2,000 years of contemplation on this. And John Paul II was so important for me on my journey too. He kept kind of like coming up and revealing these types of beautiful things to me. And I just found so much beauty. So I like anything that I didn't understand, I felt like I was getting the better deal because I was getting exposed to the richness of how God created us anyway. So I was like, yeah, but there's so much beauty here. Why would I want to abandon that?
That's beautiful. So this has just been going on the past few months then, and here we are in February, less than 2 months from Easter Vigil.
Yeah. Praise be to God.
Yes, praise be to God. So what do your days look like now? Still doing research, still trying to surrender more and more? I think that's something you mentioned to me when we grabbed coffee, but
I mean, yeah, every day, you're always trying to learn how to, like, for me, since like a lot of this is new, God's had some beautiful ways of like humbling me and healing me from some things that I didn't know were affecting my relationship with Christ. It's been really, his promises are real. Like if you take his promises literally, they're real. They are real. They are 100% real. Especially when you talk about like healing your heart and stuff like that, like healing if you let him in, he'll do it. And but yeah, my days now look like they're rather peaceful. I feel like that I went through a pretty significant, like, humbling experience with Christ, and he like isolated me in some ways and like really increased my humility and reverence for him. And like, so now a lot of I've really found a love for scripture. And I've really just been staying in that lately. It's been like I did a bunch of research and like consumed. I'll read the catechism and scripture and find the correlations between the two. I really love doing that. There's so many beautiful connections to Genesis, to the New Testament, like, and those fascinate me. And when the Holy Spirit reveals something in scripture, I love contemplative prayer on scripture. These are the things that now I've kind of refined down into, is just getting to the gifts that God gave us through the apostles, through Mary, through Saint Joseph, the Holy Family, Jesus Christ himself, and salvation history. It's such a story of humanity and God in so many ways. It's so deep, and I love the depth of scripture, and I feel like that it's probably my favorite. It's my favorite book in the whole world now, so
amazing. Yeah. Amazing. Can you remind me when you had that interior voice, what was the phrase before, when you knew it was time to enter the Catholic Church? What was that?
Yeah, it came through as how you feel about your journal is how you should feel about my church, and my church is the Catholic Church.
And my church is the Catholic Church. Yeah. Fantastic. One other thing I wanted to ask you about is you were definitely talking about a lot of the highs in the, I don't know, last 8 months or so. And then you mentioned that obviously the enemy is going to be right there trying to snatch you away in any way. If you can just express maybe one, as it relates to spiritual warfare, if you can address just how real that is and perhaps how you dealt with it, because the last thing he wants you to do is read scripture, is to dig for the truth, is to renounce certain ways of living, certain vices. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, great question. Thank you for the question. And it's been such a pleasure being able to share on here too. So thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, yes, spiritual warfare is really, really real, especially, um, especially if you have. I want to be careful here because there
Sure.
are certain things that, me personally, the way that I experienced it, and this might not be because I think that spiritual warfare is so tied to our emotional well-being too. It's so like I want to be careful to anybody who's listening that may need to experience some therapeutic
Sure.
stuff. Right?
Great disclaimer. Totally agree.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And so for me though, I will say for me personally, therapy ends at awareness. Becoming aware of our patterns of behavior, becoming aware of, and then therapy ends for me at coping mechanisms. That's coping mechanisms and awareness. How do I become aware of my negative patterns of behavior? And how do I become aware? And how do I have coping mechanisms so that I can actually focus throughout the day? That's where it ended for me. The rest of it was a spiritual problem. Um, and so that, after beginning to understand my own internal woundings and my own internal like manifestations of patterns of behavior from those internal woundings, I was able to define the battle lines and really start to see the battle lines and pray to have guidance through those battles and guidance through those things. And I found that um, God's light, the light at which he's trying to bring into those places, Satan will sit at your emotional wounds and poke them and manipulate you emotionally. Uh, St. Ignatius of Loyola is wonderful for discernment through spiritual warfare if you have emotional wounds, because he teaches you to not listen to your emotions as much, but to keep coming to Christ, and to keep bringing the light in to illuminate how Satan is using your emotions against you. And Satan will like change his playbook. He'll flip pages in his playbook and be like, well, I know how to use this wound against you for this and this and this. And like, I can do it this way and this way and this way. And if you begin to like really pay attention and journal, I would say anybody that's experiencing that, journal the tactics that are going on. A lot of people will say don't focus on Satan, but if you're in as deep as I was with the world telling me who I was, it was kind of inevitable. I kind of had to. It was like I had some people say, "Well, just focus on Jesus, and that's all you need." It's like these things. But what do you do when these things are getting in the way of you and Jesus? Like, what do you do? And so I found that bringing more Christ into my life through prayer and through asking for Christ to reveal Satan and really surrendering and saying, look, Lord, I am not afraid of suffering. I am not afraid of how you are going to illuminate this. My body is yours. Just deliver me from this evil. I know there's evil going on within me. I know I wasn't able to like pinpoint it. Now I've got like a really good map of how my pride kind of works and how Satan is kind of obsessed with that pride and like how he would try to manifest that pride to perpetuate his agenda as opposed to God's agenda. Um, but one thing I would say is that it's for me, it was just being solid, committed, and just having a structured prayer routine, journaling, and using Western therapy only to gain awareness so that I could bring God's light in to the places that needed to illuminate Satan's work in my own like psyche. Also scripture, Jesus gives us many things that will help illuminate if you where your pride is and stuff like that. So if you're really prayerful about Jesus's words, you can find these things. For me personally, I found myself there's a section in the New Testament where Jesus says it's he prefers the sinner that's on the mountain beating his chest saying, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, as opposed to the Pharisee that's standing on the mountain saying, I'm glad I'm not like these people.
Sure.
When I read that, I said, Lord, I find myself looking at people saying, I'm glad I'm not like these people. Help me. I don't want to be like that. I want to be the sinner that's beating my chest on my knees saying, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner, I'm a sinner. But I don't feel that way. Lord, help me. When I made that prayer to him and told him, I'm not afraid of suffering and I'm not afraid of dying, like spiritually dying, I went through what is referred to as like a mortification. And it was pretty wild. But if you don't mind, out of respect to your channel and stuff like that, there's a really good book on spiritual warfare that I'd like to share with your audience.
Go.
And I have it. It's called The Catholic Warrior by Robert Abel. It's an amazing reference. Helped me a lot. Helped me a lot. Helped me to understand some of Satan's tactics. Robert Abel also writes a deliverance manual. And those books were so necessary for me to help be freed from the delivered from the like obviously it was all glory to Jesus Christ, all glory to God. He did all of it, but we need to participate in that battle, because also that I really fully agree with Father Ripperger that you learn so much about what cup God is trying to have you carry through battling these spiritual battles as
Wow.
well. Like you are going to find God's will through going through these things, and you will find God's will for you. You'll find what's written on your heart, because he's going to deliver you from the evil and reveal to you the beauty that's written there before your parents even conceived you. And I love it. Praise be to God.
Wow. That's really good. That's really good. I appreciate that. What do you know when that book was written by chance?
I can look into. I think it's. I have no idea. It says copyright 2004.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. Um, yeah, I thought it was important to touch on that. When anyone's talking about, again, kind of these high moments. I mean, you did discuss some of the low lights as well, but the importance of understanding it's a battle. You don't just walk into this new territory and lift your fists. Everything's great. There's
Yeah.
warfare, very, very real. And I've had discussions not on this show, but with others that have said um, they, how do I say this? They didn't understand, I guess, the force, the principalities that were at work until they opened their eyes and wanted to follow the truth. They simply could not see it. And there's a quote from Saint Cassian, I believe, if that's how you pronounce it, where he's saying the demons don't care when you're doing their work. Why would you see them? Why would you be aware of such a dominion if you are already a servant of that dominion?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that's when you start to feel the pushback, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, that's 100% true. You know, Satan was leaving me alone all the way until,
Yeah.
you know, just all the way until. Um, and in a lot of ways, in my case, he overplayed his hand, and God let him overplay his hand. It's, uh, it's I will say this too, like my experience with it, battling the spiritual warfare, my faith was strengthened through it, and the fruits of it on the tail end of it. Obviously, there's always going to be little battles here and there, but the major battles, Jesus Christ already won those. You know,
Yeah.
it's done, and like you'll find so much strength in your faith, and just so many gifts through those sufferings.
Yeah.
So much.
Um, okay. I want you to, maybe we can land the plane with this. Think of people that are potentially they're thinking about entering RCIA.
Yeah.
What would you say to them? I know that's incredibly broad, but what would you say if you had a group of people, you don't know their backgrounds, you just know that they all are interested, they're exploring the
Yeah.
church?
Yeah. I would say um, ask questions and find a consistent source that seems to answer your questions in a way that you can understand. I think that scrupulosity is a real thing, and uh, if you start getting information from too many sources, it can enhance that, and you can start to become confused, and you open yourself up to Satan trying to take you away from the truth and take you away. So I'd say like a handful of resources that are trusted resources that many Catholics would agree with, like Father Mike Schmidt, and like these very well known resources. They might not answer all of your questions, but there's so many rogue preachers out there on YouTube and on social media. If
Yes.
you if you're seeking any form of Christianity, but if you're pursuing the Catholic faith, refine where you're getting your information from and how you're getting your questions answered. And that will help you a lot. Slim it down, talk to your local priest, but also know he's a fallible man. Like he might not have all the answers for you. They're very intelligent and they're very spiritual people, but they might not have all the answers, and you might have to pursue some things, find a good mentor, and and just realize too that uh, God's grace is not limited. He looks into your heart. He doesn't look into the am I making the right decision by entering a certain faith, one faith or the other. He see like he's gonna like for me personally, I can only speak to me personally, but like I get the sense from God that like he's seeing your pursuit of his love, your pursuit of him, and where that lands you. I personally don't feel like that you'll be condemned if you end up in a place that, as long as you gave your heart to Christ at the end of the day, that's important. But I do think a sacramental life is also really important too. So
Well said. Absolutely. And only you know if you're holding something back in that journey. I mean, it's the same as the confessional. It's like, oh, I said everything. Well,
yeah,
you know if you have
yeah,
something, you know. So I'd say
yeah,
the same. What your advice is fantastic for those that are considering. Yeah, I would just piggyback and say, you know, when we say, "Oh, I've given it all," I've said that statement.
yeah,
It's ridiculous. Or like when I would play basketball in high school, the coach, I wanted him to believe that I was running as hard as I could because I didn't want to go throw up afterwards. And so I would start moving my arms like I mean like a lunatic. And he
yeah,
started to see through it. It's like
yeah,
you're just not running that fast and
yeah,
you're not giving it your all. And so
yeah.
only we can answer that question and we know if we're holding something back. And so that's what I'd say. Is like if you can get to that place where you're saying truly empty me, I am yours. That kind of thing with full sincerity, which is very difficult to do, but that's my prayer for anyone that's looking to pursue the fullness of the faith. So
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and you'll find a lot of beauty in it too if you come into the Catholic faith. Like there's a lot of those, and well said too, Eddie. But there's a lot of those like misnomers out there or misconceptions, and there is some ugly blemishes on the history of the Catholic faith as well. But there's also a ton of beauty and wisdom that she teaches, and I think that those that are coming in, like there's a lot to look forward to. There's a lot to not be afraid of. There's a lot to be like really excited about. You know.
yes, yes, agreed. Anything you want to end with, Taylor? It's been
No,
fantastic.
I think that like yeah, I feel good. So yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much again. Really appreciate it. Everyone, please, again, share this video, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, take care and God bless.